Scope, a podcast of two guys in their 20s giving the perspective on the games that we love, the headlines of pop culture, and the meaning behind it all. I'm your host, Wellington Burns, and my counterpart, Savon Morris, was not able to be on for this episode. I'm joined by a special guest, Micah Mcdonald. He's been on the podcast in the earlier days. Like, if you've really been with us, like you can remember he's been with us from the earlier days, a former classmate of mine. But thank you so much for being back on, bro.
Hey, I appreciate it. It's always a pleasure to be on here.
Yeah, man, definitely. And for this episode, we have a lot of topics to get into. Some NFL topics, NBA, college football. Also in the second half, I'm going to do a review with a couple of guests for the Irishman. But to start off with just thoughts on Baltimore's road win versus Tampa and just, the drastic issues the Bucs are facing. The Ravens were able to win 27-22. Lamar Jackson threw for 238 yards and a pair of second half touchdowns. And, this also gives them consecutive victories for the first time this season. And on the other side, this is the first time Brady has, faced a 3-game skid since 2002. But what are your thoughts on this win for Baltimore and also just the issues we're seeing Tampa Bay face and really kind of an unprecedented season for Brady?
Sure. So I think for me, the Ravens finally closed the game out. We haven't seen that in a minute. They blew 3 leads earlier in the season.
Yeah.
That they should have had. And I think with the Buccaneers, I'm confused at what's going on. We would be remiss to think that the marital issues of Tom Brady does not contribute to some way in his play.
Yeah.
Their roster is still a top 3 roster in the NFC.
Oh, for sure.
So it's weird that they're 3-5. And yesterday, they had Luke Gadecki out, they had Antoine Winfield Jr. out, Carlton Davis, Russell Gage, Sean Murphy-Bunting. Julio barely played, and Nakeem Hicks was out as well. And so you have all of those guys out, but you still, even without those guys, have a talented roster, and yet you can't pull off a win. And so it's concerning to me. They're lucky they're in the division that they're in because they're still
about to say that. I was just about to say
they're
that.
Still only half a game out.
Yeah,
and
very
if the Falcons win, they're only going to be a game back, right? Mm-hmm. And so they still have a chance, even because this is probably the worst division in all of football.
Yeah.
And so they're lucky that they're there, but I'm very concerned. Mm-hmm. I'm very concerned, and even though they have seems to be a really easy schedule the rest of the way. They have 3 teams above 500 average currently that they have for the rest of the way. Everybody else has at least 4 losses. And so they should have an easy road. But what we've seen up to this point, they've lost games that they should have won. And their synergy is not there. Injury issues are not there. So this is a very big concern for the Buccaneers. They're just lucky that they are in the division that they're in. That's the only saving grace they have right now.
Yeah, definitely. And when you also look at a team like Baltimore, who they're in the same division as Cincinnati, who's starting to kind of like to pick up steam and look better. Like, what are your thoughts on their division and just kind of like how Baltimore can develop? Because we know this team has a lot of potential. They have one of the most dynamic quarterbacks, Lamar Jackson. But how do you think they can fare for the rest of the season?
I think that's it. I think this one was huge for them.
Yeah.
Because, as you said, the Bengals are picking up now. Joe Burrow's playing like we know who Joe Burrow can play like. Joe Mixon's playing well. Their defense is starting to play well. And so they need a win at this time against still a talented roster. So, hey, we can actually close out a game. Because they should be, at this point, 6-1. They should be.
Yeah.
They shouldn't have lost the games that they lost. Their defense hasn't been able to close, and their offense hasn't been able to just contain. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the problem. The offense played contained and didn't play just to go out and ball out and win. They would say, we have a comfortable lead. Let's contain now. And so that's one of their biggest issues. And we know Lamar Jackson's at least a top 10 quarterback, if not top 5 quarterback in the NFL. Mm-hmm. And so he had to show that, hey, I can close the game out. And they almost didn't. Like, there was a very real possibility that the Bucs should have won last game.
They could have blown that game.
They could have. And so they better be grateful. But I think that should be a little bit of a morale boost for the Ravens. They say, hey, we got this. It was still close, but we closed it out. Let's do this the rest of the way. But they're gonna have a tough time, even with Pittsburgh, even with Cleveland. They're gonna have a tough time winning that division. So this is the right way to go about it. This is the right step.
Yeah, definitely. And now getting into thoughts on kind of Tua's return in the Dolphins win versus the Steelers and some of their offensive struggles. Miami was able to win 16-10 and survive a scoreless second half in it. This also snaps a 3-game losing streak that began on September 29th when Tua was concussed in a loss to Cincinnati. Jalen Waddle led the Dolphins with 88 yards receiving and Tyreek Hill had 72. But what were your thoughts on Miami's win with Tua back? And also, even though they got a win, the second half they were scoreless. didn't have that same kind of like fluidity offensively that we saw from them in the first half, in the beginning parts of the season. But what are your thoughts on kind of how that team is presently constructed?
Well, I think very simply, they just need to get back to a rhythm. I mean, they haven't had Tua for several weeks. I think that's the main line for that offense.
Yeah.
But the biggest problem with that offense is they have one of the worst rushing attacks in the league. They're fourth worst in the league,
Mm.
and so they really currently are a one-dimensional team.
Yeah.
Their defense was surprising at the way that they played and only giving up 10 points because they're ninth worst in yards per game. They're 20th in defensive points per game, and so
Yeah.
they have a low tier defense, and their only saving grace is those skill wide receivers and Tua, because they're not doing it on the ground and they're not doing it on the defensive front. And
Mm.
the defense really showed up in a way that they needed to in Tua's first game back last week against a kind of mediocre offense. But they've given up 24 points or more in 4 of their 7 games.
Yeah.
That's not a good recipe to win,
Mm-mm.
especially in the division that they're in. And so that division, the AFC East, can still have 3 teams if Miami can bolster up and play some defense, but also start to having any sort of running attack. But it's going to be hard, especially in the division with the Jets, who are playing well, surprisingly, and the
Mm.
Buffalo Bills, who are just probably the best team in all of football.
Yeah.
And so you have
Probably.
to win those games, and they're going to have a lot of tough games coming up. So if those teams can exploit that one-dimensional offensive attack and can
Mm.
really go against that defense, it's going to be really difficult for them. But I think specifically for the offense, they just need to get back to the rhythm.
Mm.
And we started to see it towards the end of the game, but we saw what happened at the beginning of the season. We know what they can be.
Yeah.
And when Tua is 100% healthy, I think that they have a great case for having one of the best offensive attacks in football.
Yeah, absolutely. And also when you look at kind of the fact that this is a team that does have I kind of like experienced a really tough situation with Tua being out for the concussion protocol, and then also how the league is dealing with quarterbacks being called on certain hits. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Like the aftermath of the Tua concussion situation, and also just how the league is calling certain hits on quarterbacks. Now that's putting defenders at kind of a predicament in certain situations.
I think it's really difficult especially for defenders, because they already have it hard enough on all the other rule changes in the past couple of years on not hitting quarterbacks in a certain place. You can't hit them low, you can't hit them high. You have to do a waist tackle. And so, especially when it's moving at a speed like that, and you have mobile quarterbacks like Tua and Lamar and Jalen Hurts, it's very difficult for them to do a proper, now modern day tackle against some of these people.
Right.
And some of these roughing the passer calls were not roughing the passer, and
Oh no.
I think the league recognized that. Even though some of the head referees recognize that, but it's getting to a point where this is a quarterback league, and they already have it made for them. And now you're just hurting the defense more with calls that aren't calls. I think with the Tua situation, that's the risk you run with a mobile quarterback,
Right.
and that's the risk you want. And I think what garners more importance. You saw this in the likes of Joe Burrow last year and even this year, how many times he gets sacked. They don't. I think teams are starting to be more concerned with how good their offensive line is, because you have quarterbacks that are incredibly valued and young. You don't want to see Joe Burrow injured like we did in his earlier career. We don't want to see Tua injured. We don't want to see Jalen Hurts injured.
Mm-mm.
We don't want
Yeah,
to
this
see
is the
Lamar
future
injured.
of the league, the future faces of the
Right.
league.
We want them to succeed. We don't want a what if situation. What if this happened? What if that happened?
Right.
We want to see them in their primes and see them play well, especially as young guys in the league. So the league is having an issue in trying to figure out how to do this, and roughing the passer calls, like what we've seen this season, all of them have been wrong. They've been too soft, and so what does that do for the defender? It makes them hesitate.
Mhm.
So that gives quarterbacks like when Bryce Young comes into the league. We
Yes.
saw the scrambling ability that they had against Tennessee, even though they lost. Like,
Amazing
I
game.
was impressed. Impressed. I don't like Alabama, but I was so impressed by Bryce Young. But when he gets in the league, he's going to be able to do that more. And so it gives the quarterbacks an edge, but it really hurts defensive linemen. It really hurts outside linebackers that are rushing. It makes the secondary and the cover linebackers play longer,
Mhm.
and well, so it exposes more holes in the defense. And while we like scores, I still love seeing a staunch defensive front that can just stop somebody. But when
Yeah.
you're a defensive lineman barreling through somebody and you don't have the time to stop, but now you have to think about stopping, the sack record. It hurts the sack statistics that we'll see. And so I think this could be a tipping point for that because
It really could.
I don't want to see some Big 12 60-50 game. Like it's fun when you watch it,
Mhm.
but like I want to see a good defense. I want to see Aaron Donalds of the world get their credit due.
Yeah.
Um, and so
That's how that's how defense wins so many titles, and we even saw
100%.
that we even saw that last year with what Aaron Donald was able to, like you said, against Cincinnati.
Right.
Like
We
that,
saw
they
that.
were
We
able.
saw that in Peyton Manning's last Super Bowl win. That
Yeah.
was one of the best defensives we've ever seen. Pittsburgh, for years and years, has gone to the extent they have because of their defense.
Mhm.
And so we see these defensive front carry the teams. And that could be, if they don't address it, it could be severely tarnished and it could hurt the league if they
Right.
don't fix that. But I'm glad that Tua is back. I think it's hard because as a football player, you want to play. I don't
Mhm.
care what injury I have. I just want to play the game. And so we don't know if Tua lied and said I'm good. We don't know. We don't know what happened. But that's the natural
And that's
reaction
another
for a
thing.
guy.
Players can brush off things and be like, "I'm good," even though they
Right.
know they're not, but they don't
I
want to
mean,
they don't want to sit
there
out.
are plenty of stories in multiple leagues of like actually I had a torn Achilles for the last 6 weeks of the season.
Mhm.
I didn't tell anybody, but I was hurting. But I played it because I wanted to play. And so
Yeah.
it's hard to be that. But yeah, that's why you have to have good medical examiners, medical trainers. But I think if you're a team, you have to have the caution. If it's a head hit, you have to sit him out for at least a quarter.
Mhm.
And you can evaluate on hit. I understand the need to win, but the care for your players is much more important. Um, and so they might have messed up there. I think it could have been much worse.
Yeah.
I mean, potential to end his career if they did it any worse.
Mhm.
So I'm glad that didn't happen. But it's a tricky line right now in the NFL to see what's repping Patrick Carl. How do we treat our quarterbacks? Um, it's a tough thing to figure out currently in the NFL.
Yeah, definitely. And now getting into the Chiefs' road win versus the 49ers, Kansas City won 44-23, and Patrick Mahomes threw for 423 yards and 3 touchdowns. And this was just a collective performance. And also on the other side, it was Christian McCaffrey's debut performance with San Francisco, and McCole Hardman had 2 touchdown runs, and Justin Watson had a 4-yard a TD run. But what are your thoughts on Kansas City's win, and also what San Francisco can improve on? Because when I look at Kansas City, like this is a team I think right there with Buffalo. I think it's Buffalo and Kansas City and everybody else. Like I think those are the top 2 teams in the league, and they kind of separate themselves from everybody else. But what were kind of your thoughts on this game?
I think that we saw the 49ers go against finally an actually good team and show kind of, in my opinion, the fraud that they are.
Yeah.
They do not have a good offense, especially. I mean, Trey Lance had his issues and health issues, and we don't know what Jimmy G is. And we have not Bailey Zappi, Brock Purdy playing,
Right.
right? And so I think when we saw them play very well, they still have a really good defense. Like let's not
Mhm.
get
Oh
that
yeah, that
twisted.
defense is
They're
top
still an
tier. It's
incredible
a top tier
defense,
defense. Yeah.
except when they play against a good team.
Yeah.
They gave up 40 something points. This was the best defense in the league up to this point, and they
Mhm.
just got destroyed by competent offense. And now they have Kadarius Toney in the Chiefs as well.
Yeah.
That recent trade, and so to me, I think it's good that they figured it out now. That we're maybe not be as good as we think we are.
Earlier in the
They have
season, not later. Yeah.
legitimate offensive concerns. I think McCaffrey could be good, but we already know the health concerns with McCaffrey if he can even play a full season. I think with Debo, I think you can alleviate some of that by still having Debo run his running plays. Uh,
Right.
but again, they have a favorable schedule the rest of the way as well. Um, every team that they're playing the rest of the way have at least 3 losses, and only 3 have an above 500 record currently. So they're kind of in the same path as the Buccaneers. They have an easy schedule. People are barely above 500 or 500 or below, and they're still in contention in their own division.
Yeah.
They still have that. There's still a tough division to play in, regardless of the records. They're still gritty. I think kind of they're even, all 4 of them.
Mhm.
So I think this should be a wake up call to them. But I also think, in regards to the Chiefs, we saw, they're back. They're still here. They never left. They're
Yeah.
still one of the best offenses we've ever seen in the history of the sport. And their defense played well against, admittedly, in my opinion, a bottom tier offense, but
Mhm.
they still played well. And they need that. They need to see how they can play against a good defense. And they played well. And so if you're the Buffalo Bills, you're looking at this team like, oh, they played against a good defense and trounced them and scored over 40 points against them. And so this should be a wake up call to the rest of the league that the Chiefs are serious competitors, and the Bills are not just the only team at the top.
Yeah, it's not just Buffalo. It's not just Buffalo at all. You still
Even
have to.
though they still make a case,
Yeah,
but
Buffalo
still,
still makes the case. Like I said, like this team we think can be the best team in the league overall. But Kansas City is still that team you have to respect and go through in the AFC if you actually want to get to that pinnacle for the league.
right.
And now kind of getting into Green Bay's surprising loss to Washington. I'm this might be like Savon would have been like completely just out of it this episode because he's a big Packers fan. Like he's just been struggling all season,
Ooh.
seeing this team's just constant struggles. But they lost to Washington 23-21 as penalties piled up at the worst moments. And this is also with this being their third straight loss, a lot of panic going on. But what are your thoughts on this season for Green Bay so far? Obviously, like they didn't first season without Devontae Adams, trying to adjust new receivers in, but what are kind of your thoughts on what their main issues are and just how can it be fixed going forward?
They should be very concerned. Um, I think I don't think at this point, if they continue the way they're not making the playoffs, and I would bet on them now to not make the playoffs.
Right.
Because the Vikings are 5-1.
Yeah, they're in.
So you're
They're
not
it's different with Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay like they don't
right.
have like a serious threat in it. This
Exactly.
Green Bay it's different.
They don't have. They will not win their division. I would be very shocked if they turned it around. A lot of the complaints and the issues are wide receivers and that issue. But I compare them to the likes of the Giants, who have legitimately a practice squad wide receiving core, legitimately,
Yeah, they really
and they
do.
just traded away their best one in Kadarius Toney.
Mhm.
Which I'm mind blown. But Kadarius hasn't played. But what's the difference? The Giants are 6-1, and so I look
Really
at
good coaching as well.
great coaching, but Daniel Jones as your quarterback,
Yeah,
who he's actually been competent this year, and I have been vouching every year for him to leave. I don't want him, but he's played like he's just a game manager, and he's plays well under a Daboll's system. But then you look at one of the probably the athletically the best quarterback of all time, in Aaron Rodgers,
Mhm.
just by pure skill. And you're making the same complaint, even though you have way better receivers than the Giants do. Yeah, look
Right.
at your record, and you lost to Washington, and
Of all
horrible
teams to
team,
lose to. Yeah.
a horrible team. And so, at some point, I think it boils down to the chemistry of the team. I don't think they have it. And this has been an issue with Aaron Rodgers for a while, where every single year we keep seeming to have this narrative that he doesn't like his team. He doesn't like the Packers. He doesn't want to be there. We had a bunch of those issues where we thought he was going to leave, and then their quarterback or their coach came in and they finally did well. He played a couple of good seasons, but now I think we're exposing. I don't think there's a chemistry there that there should be there. I don't. But he said himself he doesn't trust his wideouts. He doesn't trust them. He doesn't trust anybody that he's throwing to, and
Yeah.
that hurts you. At some point, you have to trust them so you make the right throw. Because when you don't trust somebody, you're not going to make the right throw because you don't trust them. And
Mhm.
so you have to. I get it, but you're hurting yourself in the way that you pass the ball to your players if you're not giving them the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
Um, and so you're hurting yourself in the games. And so this is bad for the Packers because here's their next couple games. They have the Bills, Lions, Cowboys, Titans, and Eagles. I think they'll beat the Lions, but they have a big potential to be 4-8 at the end of it. I don't think they'll beat the Bills, Cowboys, Titans, or Eagles. I will find it hard pressed. I mean,
Yeah.
especially with
I
the
think they'll
loss to
lose those.
Washington,
Yeah,
they
they'll
blew a
lose those.
game against the Giants, um, and so I think at the end of the stretch, their best bet is being 4-8 if they beat the Lions, because the Lions are so wishy washy in their offense. One they gave no score 40, the next their score was literally 0 points.
Right.
And so we'll see there, but that's the biggest stretch. That's the biggest concern.
Is
Uh,
Buffalo Green Bay the Sunday night game?
I'm not sure. It might
Okay.
be.
Okay.
I, I think the Bills can beat it by at least 30 points.
Yeah, that's going to be a major
Um,
blowout. It's gonna be
So
amazing.
that's a tough thing because you look at the Bucs record. If you're comparing the Bucs and the Packers and seeing which one is worse, the Bucs have a very favorable schedule the rest of the way. Rest of the way,
Mm.
these simply the next 5 games. One of them is has a losing record for the Packers, and most I think every single one of them has only 2 losses or less. And so that's a huge downfall if you're trying to catch up with Vikings, which you won't. And so that's why I'm calling it now. They're not making the playoffs. They should start building for next year because, in my opinion, their season's over.
Yeah,
And
it's
that
time to
might be
prepare for the
Aaron
future.
Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers can do things. We've seen it before. We've seen him turn
Oh yeah,
the ship around. But not this. I don't think not this
not
late in
this
the
late.
season.
Yeah, not this late. This is
And I
different.
think it's hard. I think the Vikings are rolling. So and you look at the other teams that they have contention with. I mean, in my opinion, the NFC East surprises as I say because the last couple of years they've been the worst in the
This might be
league.
the best. Might be the best
They
division
have
in the league.
3 teams that will make
Yeah,
the playoffs,
yeah.
and I'll tell you, every single week, I remember when the Giants were 4-1.
Mhm.
I said they still have the potential to be 4-13 because they keep winning. They keep winning the closest games possible,
Yeah,
but they're winning.
pushing it. Yeah, but they
They're
find a way.
winning.
They find a way.
Their defense is really good. Daniel Jones is being a great game manager, and I love that he scrambles because that's what he needs to do, and he's not fumbling as much as he used to.
Right.
So Saquon is back. Can we
Fully
just say
back.
that?
Yeah, fully
Saquon
back.
is back.
Yeah, yeah,
Top
for sure.
top 3 back to the league. Top 2. Him and Nick Chubb,
Yes.
I think, are head over above everybody else.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's been the biggest help. I remember watching the Monday night game for that Saquon just had an incredible run.
Mhm.
And he just he blew it for a touchdown. It was incredible, and so that's what we needed. We had a middling quarterback with a bad wide receiver core with no running back, and now we have that.
Right.
And so that's a huge difference. I think Aaron Jones for the Packers has severely disappointed him and AJ Dillon because that's what they need. If they don't have the wide receiver core, they need them to run. They haven't run well.
Yeah, definitely. And now getting into thoughts on Seattle's win in LA and being first place in the NFC West. Seattle won 37-23 as Kenneth Walker the third rushed for 168 yards and 2 touchdowns. Geno Smith also completed 27 passes for 210 yards and 2 touchdowns. But what are your thoughts on how Seattle's been playing this season? Because this is a year where we're seeing Geno Smith play really well, like look comfortable in a system, and also not obviously like we're not at the end of the season, but you do one of those things of hindsight, being 2020 with them going away from Russell Wilson, and it seems to be working right now because we're seeing what's happening with Russell Wilson in Denver. They're not looking as good. But what are your thoughts on how this Seattle team is looking so far in the season?
Sure. So besides the Giants and the Jets, they have been the most shocking teams by far, right?
Mhm.
And I think what we see is that we've seen that they've prepared him really well behind Russell Wilson. Regardless of how well or badly Russell has played this season, I think that they prepared Gene well because we made that trade and we thought, all right, Juliak's going to be the quarterback, or they're going to trade for somebody.
Mhm.
And then I think it was a shock out of training camp that we saw Geno Smith get the starting job.
Oh yeah,
Now we don't see that as a shock. I mean, look at if you look at the stats, he's first in completion percentage, seventh in yards, sixth in touchdown, fourth in QBR, and third in rating. Like he is by all definitions this season a top 5 quarterback. This season,
yeah.
he is playing out of his mind. And I get he has great receivers, Tyler Lockett, DK, all those guys, but he's he plays like he's been doing this for 10 years as one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the league. He doesn't care, and he knows. I mean, he said himself, like people wrote me off. I just didn't write him back, right?
Yeah,
Now they have. Let's just not get it twisted. Kenneth Walker's a star.
for sure.
And we knew that in college. But he's a star running back, and Rashad Penny, even the backup, is a solid backup to have as well. And so they have an incredibly dangerous offense. Um, to go up against. I mean, you even look at their defense. Tariq Woolen is leading the league in interceptions.
Mm.
The biggest error that I see in this team is their pressure. They have nobody
Yeah,
on their defense that has more than 3 sacks. Nobody. And so I think that's their issue and why they have been playing some close games recently is
Mhm.
because they can't pressure the quarterback. They can't. And so that might hurt them against some really accurate passers in Matthew Stafford. Um,
Yeah,
and guys like that. But their rushing defense is really good. They have a great secondary. led by Tariq Woolen, who's playing out of his mind this season. I think this is a very interesting, and they have a very crucial game against the Giants this week. They're favored by three
Big game.
points.
Yeah, really big game.
So we'll see against a really good Giants defense to see if they can stop this offense that has been playing really well. The Giants have one of the best rushing defenses in the country, um, but also not a great passing defense, but better than they have last year. Um, and so we'll see if with who they play in the solid defense of the Giants, we'll see if their offense can really keep up. And they have in the next couple of games some really good offenses that they're playing against as well. So we'll see if their
Yeah.
defense can hold up, but they have to pressure the quarterback. So I think, but I still think they have a really great shot. Shocking as it is to say, as coming into the season, we
Yeah.
thought they were going to be one of the bottom three teams.
Oh yeah, that was one of the teams that we
Along
thought were gonna just bottom out immediately.
along with the Giants and the Jets,
Exactly.
who are 5 and 2 and 6 and 1 respectively, right?
Yeah.
And so we're seeing this team, even though they have tough league opponents,
Mm.
I think the poise that Geno Smith shows, um, and the dynamic running game that he has to carry a lot of pressure off of his back. Because I mean, if you compare Geno and Daniel Jones, this season they're playing really well wide because they have a running back that can get that pressure off.
Yeah, huge
Daniel
advantage.
Jones is playing well now because he has Saquon Barkley healthy. Geno has playing well in his own right, but it's great that he has two solid running backs beside him that can carry the pressure off of him. So that makes them to have a multiple spread offense. They can play well. They can do the run. They can do the pass consistently. So it really tires the defense out, and really alleviates a lot of pressure off their defense when they're scoring. So I think this is an interesting year. I
It
think the
really is.
Seahawks have a good potential to win their division if they can continue rolling. Well, I hope Geno Smith continues to roll how he's doing. Um, it's just exciting to watch some teams that we wrote off at the beginning of the year, and they're playing really well. They're 4-3. They still need to get some wins,
Mhm.
so we'll see. I think this next game against the Giants will really decide
It'll tell
and
us a lot.
show
Yeah.
us show us. Oh, are they for real, or are they just going to be a middling team and try to vie for a bottom seed in playoffs, which is still surprising in of itself.
Yeah, it really is. And before we get to college football, like we've mentioned teams that have surprised us and we thought we could write off. But has there been one team that you kind of had expectations for in the preseason that kind of hasn't lived up to that hype this year and just hasn't looked like the same team you expected?
I think the Buccaneers and the Raiders. Buccaneers, I'm shocked because they still, as we said at the beginning, they have a top three roster, as they should. We thought they're going to be number one. We didn't think anything like this was going to happen. But I think the Raiders as well, really disappointed. And they play some really close games, but they're 2-5 at the moment. They're not playing like we thought they would. We thought they'd have a good defense. We thought that the tandem of Derek Carr and Devontae Adams would be playing really well. We thought Josh Jacobs would be playing way better than he is. And so it's tough to see that because I mean I was rooting for that as well. Um,
Yeah.
but we're gonna see if they can really step up and win some games because they had a really good win last week. Um, but 2-5 for the Raiders is something that we didn't think, especially how well they played a year ago. We just thought they were adding on Devontae,
Oh yeah, for sure.
and they've disappointed. And so those to me are the two teams that I'm just disappointed in
Mhm.
to start the season. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And now getting into college football with Clemson's comeback win versus Syracuse. Clemson was able to win 27-21, and Will Shipley scored twice in the run, including the go-ahead 50-yard TD run with less than 12 minutes to go. They also rallied from 14 points down in the first half for its 14th straight win overall. But what are your takeaways from this Clemson win, and also what they can build on going forward? Because they have had some really tough ACC matchups even earlier in the season with Wake Forest, where they really got pushed to the brink, but still being able to find a way to win. But what are your current thoughts on this team?
Will Shipley needs offensive help.
Yeah.
Will Shipley is one of the best running backs in the league, in the country.
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, Clemson will not win if DJ is their quarterback. I think that they should try to start Cade Klubnik, even though he barely passed and he barely ran, but they won with him at the quarterback. I think the issues that we saw with DJ last year and every single season he's played, they will not win a college football playoff with DJ as their quarterback. It just won't happen. I see Georgia as a really good, even though Stetson Bennett's been kind of wishy washy the past couple of games. I see If Alabama can win out, I think Bryce Young is so much better. Hendon Hooker is way better. Michigan's really solid. TCU, I mean, you look at Max Duggan, who's really, really good. I think if you see Clemson and UNC in the ACC championship, I think because of how bad Clemson's passing defense is, I think that Drake May will just score at will on them, and it's going to be a high-fought matchup. But I don't think DJ can score. I don't think DJ can pass. Will Shipley is their offense at the current moment, and so he needs help. I mean, if you look at these stats, Will Shipley is incredible, but they're top 30 in defensive yards per game. They're top 10 in rushing defense. That's their only saving grace, is their running defense. But they're 53rd in yards per game, 70th in passing yards per game, 40th in rushing yards per game. DJ is 40th in yards per game. He is not even a top 30 quarterback.
That's wild.
And it's bad. And so what we saw, as I mentioned, their rushing defense is great. I mean, they held Sean Tucker to 5 carries and 54 yards. They made them pass the ball. But when you're going against teams that are good at passing the ball, for example, UNC, like they're going to play against UNC most likely in the ACC championship game, barring any flop of UNC. And so you can stop a running game. That's fine. Drake May's still going to throw for 405 touchdowns. And so that's going to be their issue. Syracuse really relied on Sean Tucker to carry them a lot of the way. So when they stop the rushing attack, and this is going to show when they finally play a great offense, like they did against Wake Forest. Wake Forest should have won that game.
Oh yeah, that's a game. That's a game Clemson really got lucky that they pulled off.
Syracuse should have won that game. They blew it against, and he's not even a great quarterback. Syracuse's quarterback, he's not.
Yeah.
He's played
that's
well.
Why that's why I think when it comes to playoff, they're not going to be able to win because you're having 2 games that we just mentioned where you clearly should have lost, and you're going to face a better team, a much more elite team with a better quarterback than DJ, and it's not going to be
right. But look at the rest of their schedule. I mean, they have a Notre Dame team whose defense is still pretty solid. Their offense is a problem. They have Louisville. He's had some pretty good wins this year, but it's still kind of middling. Miami, and then South Carolina, who's now ranked, and then a potential UNC conference championship. They should be very worried about not making college football playoff title game. They could still make the college football playoff. Make no mistake, they could still win out. Yeah, that's possible. But
title game, that's different.
I don't believe there's any shot that they win the title this year. They should give it up. It's not happening. Even though they're 8-0, I don't care. They're not good enough. DJ is not a good enough quarterback. I really think, especially against maybe Notre Dame, but Louisville and Miami, they should really test to see if Cade is a good quarterback. Because they need that. DJ is not good. And that might suck some people because he's still a starting quarterback in the top 14 who's undefeated. But he has not shown himself to be a consistent enough quarterback to win a championship. And so that's my issue with them.
And people can fall for the bait of just being like, it's Clemson, they're 8-0, everything's good. But when you actually look at these games and you break it down, there's some big red flags that can show.
It's Will Shipley. Yeah. Will Shipley is incredible.
Yeah.
And their rushing defenses made other teams commit to one style of offense. But we saw that exploited, specifically against Wake Forest. You should have won that game. Sam Hartman is a great quarterback, and he exposed them. I think he has 6 touchdowns against them. He rolled their defense, and that's their issue. They have a bad secondary. They have a bad passing. I think, as I once said, I think it was 70th. Yeah, 70th, and that's passing yards per game. They have a top 30 in defensive yards per game, top 10 in defensive rushing defense, but they're horrible in the passing defense. And so I think they're actually below the halfway mark of all 120 some odd college teams. They're not even in the top 60. So that's their issue. I think they really need to get on that. They really need, because if their passing defense plays well, they have a chance. But I think it's going to be a running game versus a passing game, and in many other cases, the passing game will win. And so you really got to think. And DJ can still surprise me. He has had good games, but he's not shown it this season. Yeah. He's had his moments, but you don't want your starting quarterback to just have moments.
Just have moments, yeah, no.
I mean, you look
after what we saw from Hendon Hooker and Bryce.
Right, you look at him
like, come on, like what are we doing?
Yeah,
our quarterbacks are not at that level.
Right, exactly. So that's my issue with them. I would peg them now to be a lock to not win the championship this year.
And now getting to Oregon's convincing home win versus UCLA and their offensive rhythm recently. Oregon won at home 45-30, and Bo Nix threw for 283 yards and 5 touchdowns. And this was for this UCLA loss. And the Ducks have won 6 straight since their opening season loss to Georgia. But looking at this win and the run Oregon's been on, what are your thoughts currently on this team and their progress? Because it's a night and day difference from what we saw against Georgia. They really look like a strong, competent offensive team and kind of putting things together at the right time.
I think Oregon's just back. I think, Bo Nix, you're coming from an Auburn system, and it's a totally different system than Oregon system.
Right.
And so you saw that get exposed. He tried to run a SEC style of system against Georgia and got demolished. Mm-hmm. And so I think that was a wake up call for him. It's like, hey, no, I got to play my game here, but I also got to play the way that Oregon plays. And the way that Oregon has played is they have a top 5 rushing offense this year. Top 5. Bucky Irving is a decent running back to have. And so they had a great win last week versus Dorian Thompson-Robinson and the Bruins. Their offense is carrying them because their defense is bad. They gave up 27 points to Stanford and 22 points to Arizona. And so their offense really needs to hum to win these shootouts. And they still have a case, surprisingly enough, have a case to make the playoffs if they win out. It's going to be a narrow one because there's so many good teams at the top, but they've really shown a new leaf, and Bo Nix has finally found his groove as a quarterback for this Oregon team. Really shocked about some of the wins that they've had in the past couple of weeks, but I think that's showing that, hey, no, this is who we are. First week of the season was a fluke. This is we can play. I still don't think they would beat Georgia now, not even close. But they've turned a new leaf. They could have done, for example, what Texas A&M has done, just flopped, just given up, basically. But no, they've turned it around. They still have a chance. I think right now they're the highest ranked of the Pac-12. I think USC is right behind them. Utah is right behind them. So they still have tough schedules coming up. They have Washington, Utah, and Oregon State to end the season. That's a tough final 3.
Very tough.
But currently right now they have a 13% chance to make the playoffs if they currently right now. I don't know what it is if they went out, but they're going to have to make it on their offense because their defense is just bad. Yeah. It just is.
The blueprint is laid out for them. The offense is what's going to get them to where they want to be.
100%.
Yeah, definitely. And now getting into most interesting week 9 game. This is something like me and Tavon do every week. Kind of look at kind of like the most interesting college football game coming up. To me, Ohio State Penn State is a really interesting one because obviously Ohio State being undefeated and then facing a division opponent like Penn State is definitely going to be a tough matchup. But what are kind of your thoughts on maybe 1 or 2 games that kind of stand out to you for this upcoming week of college football?
I have a couple. You mentioned the one Ohio State and Penn State. We'll see what Ohio State can actually do against a good defense, against a good team. They have not played anybody.
Yeah, they have not played anybody.
There's no reason that they should be ranked higher. In my opinion, Tennessee should be ranked for number 1. That should what they've beat 5 ranked opponents. 5. And so just put them there. They might not win out, but to put them there,
the way Ohio State gets ranked every year just befuddles me. But hey,
right,
we'll see.
So that Penn State bounce back against a bad loss against Michigan that they had. Another one for me is Oklahoma State, Kansas State. Adrian Martinez is having a redemption season. Mm-hmm. It's really relied on his run game. He doesn't have a lot of passing stats. But can they manipulate a horrible Oklahoma State defense? The problem is they have Sanders on the other side. And Sanders is a great quarterback for Oklahoma State. So that could be a really high-shooting matchup. Another one I have is Cincinnati and UCF. Cincinnati currently is the top power group of 5 team. But as of right now, it is even on the betting boards. Even. Right. And UCF has the 60% chance to win according to Matchup Predictor. So you see how can they keep that title? I mean, John Rhys Plumlee is leading the UCF team, former Ole Miss quarterback. 2 great games. They were embarrassed by ECU last week. Embarrassed. That should never have happened. But they can bounce back. Cincinnati, barring a close loss to Arkansas, has only 1 loss to them. And they've rolled since. Can they keep that going? Another one that I have is Tennessee and Kentucky, obviously. Hendon Hooker currently right now is playing like the best quarterback in college football. He doesn't have the stats because Drake May has better stats, C.J. Stroud has better stats, Bryce Young has better stats, but he is playing poised. He's mature. He knows exactly what he's doing. One of the best transfers ever in the history of college football is Hendon Hooker because he's played so well. He has 2,093 yards, 18 touchdowns, and the biggest thing, only one interception. That's a solid quarterback.
Major.
Jalen Hyatt is going off the rails right now. Tennessee, in my opinion, again, should be ranked number 1. They have 4 top 25 victories in 7 games: Pitt, Florida, LSU, and Miami. And they have 3 more currently in Kentucky, Georgia, and South Carolina upcoming. So they could potentially, if South Carolina stays ranked, have 7 top 25 if they win out. Georgia, I can't wait for the Georgia game. I want them to win this week because of that Georgia game.
That is going to be an amazing game.
So, but that's the worry, right? A lot of young guys who are playing college football tend to look ahead farther than they should. They have to beat Kentucky now.
Yeah, you got to get to this one first. Got to get to this one.
Because Kentucky's quarterback is good, but he's really struggled, especially with his health concerns. It's been really bad. They've struggled since their loss to Ole Miss, losing 2 out of their last 3. And a lot of it has been the health issues of Will Levis.
Yeah.
And so, who's still, in many people's opinion, top 10 draft prospect. He's still a good quarterback. But it really got exposed. Can they run the football? Can they stop offenses? And so that's the biggest concern for me. It's only interesting to me because of the potential of next week, but there are also 2 ranked teams playing against each other. We'll see if Will Levis can come back and play well. But, I mean, this Tennessee team is so good.
So good, man.
So good. Obviously, their secondary is
not ranked high enough.
Pretty bad.
Not ranked high enough.
No, not at all. There's no reason they shouldn't be ranked number 1 to me. There's no reason. It doesn't matter if any of the teams that they played in the past are still ranked. They still played ranked teams, and they're still pretty solid teams. And they beat Alabama.
Mm-hmm. Like one more, like that checks everything you want. The committee should want, but
instant classic. Like I think the best college football game.
Oh yeah, I was about to say like that game is one of the best games I've seen in the last like 5 years.
I think it's top 5 in the history of the sport because of the weightiness that it had for Tennessee and finally beating Alabama in 15 years, right? And so you have that as just a huge cross that they bore, and they conquered it. And so, especially against Bryce Young, who should have been sacked like 20 times, but just somehow Houdini'd his way out of so many and just made incredible passes. Like it was insane to me. And it's instant classic. It's one of the best games in the past 20 years.
Yeah. So it was the type of game where you didn't want to leave where you were at. Like if you
absolutely not.
Just like I just want to be here. I just want to watch this.
I was fixated. I didn't go anywhere. I had to watch that game. That incredible throw that he had to Jalen Hyatt at the end of the game to set up that field goal was absolutely phenomenal. I mean, they drove 40 yards in like 19 seconds or something like that. Like it was like, wild. It was so wild.
They got the ball back with I think it was maybe 15. Like I was like, that's too much time for
There's
them.
no way.
That's too
much. It's just going to be overtime.
Yeah. Like, man.
Boom. Dots. It was just incredible. An incredible display.
Instant classic.
And that's where I saw the legitimacy of their offense. I have several shootouts. But, man, they did that against the best defensive player in all of college football, Will Anderson. We'll see if they can do that against Georgia next week and Kentucky this week. But it's really exciting to see them play so well.
Absolutely. And now getting to the NBA, one of the games earlier this week that had a lot of attention was Warriors Suns. It did not feel like a regular season game. This was like fourth game of the season, but you could just tell one of those games where it's like, okay, like this is playoff intensity.
This is playoff NBA.
This is playoff
100%.
intensity. And also Klay's first ejection was a big deal. Phoenix was able to win 134-105, and Devin Booker had 34 points. DeAndre Ayton added 16 points and 14 rebounds. And, there were 7 technical fouls called in less than 6 minutes. Klay received 2 quick technicals and rejected having words with Booker. But, man, like, what are your thoughts on a game where – because, like, last year, I always thought it was going to be Warriors Suns in the Western Conference Finals. and then this year we see what happens in this game, and just kind of like not seeing Klay ever act like that before. Klay rarely
Sure.
gets that heated, and obviously against Booker, it was entertaining to see. But what were your thoughts on that game, and just kind of like the extra intensity it had early in the season?
Well, I think Klay had an issue because Devin Booker didn't allow him to score a point when he was guarding him, and I think it was 0 for 3 field goal, 0 points, and I think he scored like 4 points the whole game.
Mm.
It was under 10.
It was not, yeah,
Um,
very low.
but incredible play. I think Suns are once again a problem. Booker is the best shooting guard in the game. It's not even close the way that he plays. And the Suns, just like last year, but I think it's better this year. They have crazy depth, like insane depth. I think Cam Johnson, now that he's starting, has a good shot to have a breakout season if he fills his role well. I mean, you have Cameron Payne coming off the bench, Mikal Bridges, CP3, and DeAndre Ayton. Yeah, and I think they have Cameron Payne, Mikal Bridges, CP3, and DeAndre Ayton are all threats.
Mhm.
Really good depth. And the Warriors or Suns, it's a great rivalry to have in the NBA.
Oh yeah.
It's not one that we have considered before instead of last year, right?
Mm.
I think it's great to have in this NBA climate, and we need to have two fierce shooting guards go head to head. I think it's incredible to see guys who love the game and show emotion. Um, but I mean, Booker's defense was incredible, holding a great offensive player down.
Mm.
I think the West still is the Nuggets to lose, but the Suns have the best chance to beat them out of the regular season record race. Um, and
So you like
so
the Nuggets the most? You
yeah,
like the Nuggets? Okay.
um, yeah, I think I mean, barring health, I think they have the best chance. They have a really good team and a one of a kind unicorn player.
Mm.
Nikola Jokic is just so good. Um, so I think that's a but I think the one team that can pressure that is the Suns because of their depth, because of their ability to score, and now the ability to have a really good defense playing. I mean, Cameron Payne's a great defensive player, and the Booker can play this defensively well. They have Aiton as well. CP3 has always been good at defense. Um, and if Cam Johnson can break out in a really special role in offense, I think it's a really great season for the Phoenix Suns.
Right.
I think there's also a check for the Golden State Warriors because I mean they got beat pretty well. Um, so you gotta make some checks, but they still have a deep team as well. Um, and I think it's just one game, but you gotta hold your emotion. Like you gotta be confident in your game, let your game speak. We've seen guys like that in the past just do that, like LeBron. He just lets most of the time he lets his game speak.
Right.
KD most of the time lets his game speak, and we saw that with the classic Spurs. Tim Duncan just let his game speak.
Yeah.
People hated
The
Tim Duncan
epitome.
because
Yeah.
he
The
wouldn't
epitome.
respond,
Yeah.
right?
He would never respond. He's like, I'm just gonna play. I'm
And
just
that's
gonna
why they hated
put up
him.
numbers.
Like
Yeah.
Kevin Garnett was so annoyed at him because he would just wouldn't respond, and that would get under his skin because he wouldn't respond. So and we see those guys play, and they let their games speak for themselves,
Yeah.
and that's how carried to winning success. And so, if Booker's getting in your face, you got to play better. You gotta because I think that was some of the problem in his offense is he let it get to him. And at some point, you just got to let your game speak. You can't let that get to you. You're an NBA player. You need to play him. If he's playing better, play better. Like, get better. Because Devin Booker is the best shooting guard in the game. And so if you want to beat him, play better. Or at least set up your other guys to help
Yeah.
you out,
Even if
or
you
at least
can't
get them to
impact
play
the
better.
game offensively, you can do it in other
Right.
ways. Because
Because I mean, you can
we've
you
seen
can
that.
play off ball offense incredibly well. I mean, you got Steph and Jordan Poole on your team,
Yeah.
right? You guys can score. Um, and so we'll see what happens with that. We'll see if that gets corrected. But I mean, this early in the season, I wanted that game so bad. That was so fun.
Yeah.
That was the NBA playoff game, and it'd be exciting to
It
see them in
was
the playoff series deep down the road.
absolutely. We need that series. We need to
Absolutely,
see them this year.
absolutely.
Definitely. And now kind of getting into like concerns with the Lakers, Sixers, and Nets. All these teams that have started the season off with more struggles than fluidity, as Philly had back-to-back Eastern Conference losses and a surprising loss to the Spurs this past weekend. As they've ranked 24th in the league in both offensive and defensive efficiency. The Lakers are on the other side are 0-4 and just had poor outside shooting, still not being able to compete against the elite teams in the West. And then with Brooklyn, they're off to a 1-4 start and lost last night to the Mavericks in overtime. And even though KD and Kyrie have had spectacular offensive performances combined, they've come up short against guys like John Moran and Luka. But what are your thoughts on these three teams, and which one would you kind of push the panic button on first?
It's by far as Lakers. They have the worst 3-15 in the whole league. Absolutely horrible. They are not making the playoffs. It's not going to
Oh
happen.
no, that's not happening.
It's not. It's not even close. I mean, when you're
I mean,
having to rely on Pat,
Stephen A. made a case that this team could actually start off 0-11. Not saying that it will happen, but
I buy it
it could
because
happen. Yeah,
you have Anthony Davis, LeBron, and we know Russ has been great in his rights, but it's just Anthony Davis and LeBron. And if Anthony Davis keeps getting hurt, it's just going to be LeBron. I mean, if you have to rely on Pat Beverly and Austin Reeves to be your offense, that is bad. They have no depth. You compare them to the Suns, like the number 10 player could be a starting person on the Lakers. That's how bad the Lakers are.
yeah.
Like Cameron Payne would be a starter over there. Like all these guys would be a starter over there. And so the Lakers should have already pressed the panic button before the season started. They should have just been taking for Wemby the whole time because they're so bad. And even worse than last year when they were also bad. And so, and I think, I mean, you see that when they play. I mean, Russ hates that he's going to be starting off the bench. I mean, that's another rumor point. Like he will be on the bench.
Right.
And LeBron hates every single time Russell has the ball because he shoots it. Like we had that horrible shot the other night where we heard audible like, "Please don't shoot this,"
Yes.
and Russell
like,
shot it anyway.
Him and AD were just literally like visibly frustrated. Most of the times they keep it in check, and you know they'll talk about it in the huddle. They were visibly frustrated on the court.
If
that Russ took that shot.
Their only saving grace, and I don't think this will even save them from a playoff contention, but if they want to have any sort of visibly okay record, is you trade Russell for at least two guys that can play well for you. You should not have Russell. He might be able to play well at the bench. We haven't seen it yet. I just don't think the camaraderie there. I don't think the chemistry there. I don't think he wants to be there if he doesn't start. I don't think they want him in the starting lineup. And so I think there's a lot of issues that's with that team, regardless of how weak their bench is.
Another thing that has to be
mentioned. I've never
mentioned,
seen a bad bench.
Another thing that has to be mentioned. A couple of years ago, this team had Gasol, Caruso, Casey. They had a championship core, and then they blow it one summer off of just being like, "Hey,
listen,
let's get a third star."
Pelinka has had some great summers. He should be fired for what he did to this team.
Oh yeah, he should.
I get the love for Rob Pelinka. I get Jeannie Buss loves him. I get it. But he screwed this team over so bad to have just absolutely atrocious. Like Pat Bev is your fourth best player. Come on, man. Like you're not going to do anything. It's going to be so bad for you. And so that's the Lakers by far. I think Philly still has talented players on the bench. They have Montrezl Harrell on the bench. They have Matisse Thybulle on the bench. They have Shake Milton on the bench. They have Daniel House on the bench and Georges Niang. So they have players that can play. The problem is they're not playing them.
Right.
Like if you see early in the season, I don't remember which game, but I think everybody in the starting lineup besides PJ Tucker had over 38 minutes played. And so you're going to tire yourselves out. Maxey is good in his own right. Harden is good in his own right. Not together. They're both shooters. Like James Harden likes to pass sometimes, but I think that's a backcourt that you want to work. But once again, we see Joel Embiid's out of shape.
Again.
When are we ever gonna see this boy in shape? He has potential to be the best center since Shaq.
It's one of the things that
and he's losing to Nikola Jokic.
It's one of the things Charles Barkley and Shaq are always upset about. They're like, this guy could really be the guy.
He could be a top five. He could be.
He could
if a top five center of all time. He could be. But Nikola Jokic is beating him. Like Embiid has 0 MVPs. Jokic has 2. Probably going to win another 3rd this year. He probably should. Like he's so good. But that's because Jokic has trained well. He's built his stamina, but he's also improving his game. Joel Embiid looks lost on every single offensive possession until he gets the ball in the paint. And Embiid gets out of gas. If he's playing 40 minutes a game, 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter, he's gone. Like he's done. He's so gassed, and that's what makes it hard for them. But they can still make the playoffs in the East. The East is nowhere near as strong as the West, so they have a chance there. Same thing for the Nets. But I mean, I think this stat for the Lakers is incredible. Outside of LeBron, AD, and Lonnie Walker and Russ, nobody is averaging more than 5 points a game. Nobody.
It's insane.
4 people over 5, and two of them are under. I think two of them are under 10. So I think they have 3 people over 10. And it's just bad. It's bad. It's hard to watch. It's really hard to watch this catastrophe.
And it's hard to watch LeBron still have the ability to compete on a championship team. Like, he has that ability to like instantly impact a contender, but he's on 100%. This team.
He's on this team.
It's a waste. It's a waste of LeBron's time.
This isn't the old Cleveland team that he carried. He still has some players that played well for one season. Truly, like Mo Williams popped off. Yeah, Daniel Gibson who popped off 1 year. They kind of helped him out, but nobody's popping off from this team. This is not going to happen. You also mentioned the Nets.
Yeah,
problem with
another
the Nets,
team I want to get to. Yeah,
problem with the Nets is their defense is absolutely horrible. This is a stat. They're giving up 100. They gave up 130 points to the Pelicans, 134 to the Grizzlies, 110 to the Bucs, and 129 in overtime to the Mavericks. They are tied with the Spurs for the second most points per game given up in the start of the season. Tied with the Spurs for the second most given up points per game. It's absolutely atrocious. And the problem is, I mean, you mentioned it. They have KD and Kyrie. I mean, when your third or fourth best player is Nick Claxton scoring the ball, like obviously Seth Curry hasn't played. He hasn't played yet.
And he's a big part.
That's the huge piece. I think if when he plays, that's going to really turn the team around. Because Seth is a really great scorer.
Really good.
I think he's a great 3-and-D guy. He's an incredible offensive presence. So that's going to help him out. But I mean, you mentioned that like you can both score 35 points a night. It's not going to matter when you're 1-4. When you can't win games because your defense is horrible, and their defense is horrible, and that's their problem. They need to fix their defense. They cannot be giving in 3 of the 4 losses 129 points or more.
Does Steve Nash make it past Christmas? Do you think Steve Nash will still be the coach of this team?
It's so hard because I love Steve Nash. Like, maybe not be as a coach, but I've always loved watching Steve Nash play. I just love Steve Nash as a person. But no, if they continue this way, he's not going to last. It's just not going to happen. And I think you saw him get thrown out the other night. And I think his team has his back. Like you saw KD come up to him like it's okay, we got you. And many of them came up to him, like even Kyrie came up to him and other people, like just like, hey, let's just play, we got you. But they're holding him back. They're talking to him. But no, I don't think the ownership cares about that. Like they care about a record with Kyrie and KD playing together, and they can't have a 1-4 start. And I think if they continue this way, if their defense is playing this bad, I think they're gonna have a bad record. Their only saving grace is if KD pops off for like 15 points one night. But he can't be doing that all night. He can't.
He's just gonna drain him because you saw even in that Milwaukee series a couple years ago, where I mean he carried that team.
Yeah.
And then in that game 7, he just ran out of gas. You know what I mean? Like obviously, like could have closed out the series, had his foot on the line. It's just there's only so much he can do. He's one of the best players in the world. Possible. Literally did everything that series, everything you could do, but it wasn't enough.
And they just have a bad defense. If you're consistently for more than, and they're almost 0-5. They only won by 4 against the team that they beat, right? And so, but what did they do? They held them to 105 points. But you're not going to win. They have nobody that they played against they held under 100 points, and only one under 110. You're not going to win games if you've given up for 3 of your 4 losses 129 points or more. It's just not going to happen. So they really need to fix defense. If they can't play defense, which KD doesn't play defense, he's not presence. Kyrie can, but he's not like that anymore. And so who do they have? They don't really have a staunch defensive presence. So they might need to make a couple trades for just guys who can play defense.
Ben Simmons is still struggling. I mean, we're still seeing Ben Simmons struggles.
I can't stand Ben Simmons. He's so bad. Like you heard the other night, Kyrie passing the ball and he passed it out, and I was like, shoot it. And so I think, he can pass the ball sometimes, but he is such a liability on offense that you're playing 4-on-5 because you don't want to give him the ball. I don't want to give him the ball. The only saving grace is that he's a really good defensive player, but that's all he has. And so at some point, I mean, this isn't a league where Dennis Rodman can thrive anymore.
Right.
Dennis Rodman thrived because he could play defense so well that it turned into offense for other players. And that's all they need him to do. But in this day and age, you need somebody who can play both sides of the ball. I mean, you see that with the way that the centers have progressed their game and playing really good offense. You look at Nikola Jokic and other guys who
Right.
play offense now. They play great offense along with their defense, and he's not there. And so I struggle watching Ben Simmons on the court because I wonder if he likes playing basketball. Like, do you actually
Mhm.
like playing this? You don't look like you're having fun, and nobody that plays with you
The
looks like they're
effort.
having fun.
It's the effort.
Right.
The effort is always in question. And I think
But
like
that
obviously,
was in question at LSU. That was in
yeah,
question before he went to LSU, and that's never changed.
yeah.
I think they just banked on his talent, and we really banked on his talent to be something. And he's had some great moments,
Oh, for
but
sure. He has
for more
the
often than not,
defensive
the effort,
upside.
like
Yeah,
he doesn't have the Mamba mentality. He doesn't have the drive that all these other players have. He just doesn't have it, and I think that's his curse is that he doesn't have that, and he'll never be great because of
right.
that. And that's their hurt because they have two great players that
Mhm.
we want to see play really well. I love watching Kyrie. I love watching Katie, but it's a struggle to see him on 104. It really is.
It really is. And before we get to our last topic, a player that I mentioned, John Morant, like with what he's doing, like how impressive has he been to you? Because like this guy just keeps getting better and better. This Memphis team can obviously be another really competitive team in the West. But what are your thoughts on what Ja is doing? And it just seems like every year he's adding a different part to his skill set.
Hmm. I think if you talked to me before that draft, I have always said that he should have been drafted number one.
Mm.
I like Zion when he's healthy. He's scary, like especially now that he looks healthy.
Yeah, he looks
Like
a lot different.
he looks, barring that bad injury that he had when he landed really hard, but he's really good when he's playing. Uh, Ja has this kind of Derrick Rose, Allen Iverson, Michael Jordan esque offense that you're scared watching him because you don't want him to get injured. Like he's the set reincarnation of Derrick Rose. It's just truly like the way that
Yeah,
he drives and the way that he plays. But man, I in my opinion he's the most exciting player to watch in all of the NBA. Like he's
absolutely.
so fun.
Yeah.
And he's carrying this Grizzlies team. I think they're what 4-1 now.
Hmm.
So good, so fun to watch. But the really big success for them has been Desmond Bane. Desmond Bane has been playing out of his mind for the Memphis Grizzlies, and it's really helped. It's really helped them. Like
Right.
John does not have to carry their offense anymore as much as he has in the past because Desmond Bane has made such an incredible improvement over last year, just like he did from the year before. Like 2 years ago, when you mentioned Desmond Bane, you just say who, but Desmond Bane has become to like a legitimate offensive scorer and a really great number two besides John Morant. But John Morant is the most exciting player to watch in all of the NBA.
Hmm.
Quickly, he's a top 10 player,
Yeah.
bar none. He's that good. And it's going to be really exciting to watch what they can do and see. I mean, they beat down the Nets, obviously, but it's really exciting to see what John Morant has done.
It really is. Yeah, definitely. I'm gonna get into our last topic, kind of like most surprising team to have a successful start to this season. A team that's really stood out to me is Portland because they're 4-1. Lillard has looked dynamic as ever, averaging 34 points, 5.3 rebounds, and 4.3 assists. Did have a recent injury and might be out for a little bit, but the way they started the season off, it's really impressed me. And obviously, no longer having McCollum, they looked extremely competent so far. But what team to you has kind of stood out? Because also had Utah, also had the Pelicans, but what's kind of been your pick?
Well, I'll say with the Pelicans, I'm not surprised that they're doing this well.
Right.
Because I thought with the healthy Zion and Brandon Ingram, like they've won games without both of them.
Exactly. Yeah. What they did against
Games against
Phoenix.
really good
Yeah.
teams, right? And they were not in there, so I think I'm not surprised by them. I expected them to be really good, especially with the healthy Zion. I think that tandem plays really well with each other. My three before San Antonio's loss last night was Portland, Utah, and San Antonio. And the reason why Utah and San Antonio both predicted to have 24 and a half wins this season. They already have three, and and Utah now is four. They're 4-1, and
Yeah.
we thought that they were trading everywhere away. This is a tank season, tank for Wemby, and like I'm so shocked. I don't know how to talk
Right.
about what's happening with them. Like I don't understand how they've won 4 games. Like I look at the roster and it's like that's this team. this team has won, but they play with such a great cohesion. And their coaching has been incredibly effective and to the point that they've won really good games. Obviously, Portland as well. I think before the season, I mean, they're projected to win 39.5 games, but there was a lot of concern about Dame. See if he was really into it, see if he was really there. Dame has played just like Dame plays. Like, he's so good.
Yeah.
But I think one of the biggest things for them, I mean, they beat the Kings, Suns, and the Nuggets, which, barring the Kings' massive disappointment, a lot of people were high on them this year. They're 0-4. It's absolutely a travesty to see that team play as bad as they have been. But Anthony Simons is a stud. I think he's averaging like 19 points a game or something like that. But I think the reason why it's working is because Dame is actually trusting him with final shot. Like, I mean, he's told him that, but he's trusting Anthony to go to work and to do something on offense. And Anthony's really taken that. And I think when a teammate like Dame trusts you,
gives you
that really helps with your confidence.
Yeah.
Right. And you have Jeremy Grant as your third option. You have Josh Hart and Joseph Nurkic as well. Like, Jeremy Grant is not a number one. We tried that in Detroit. It didn't work. But he's a great number three.
Yeah.
He's a great number three to have when one of your guys isn't healthy. So even I think a tandem between a Jeremy Grant and Anthony Simons is still a scary one, especially with how way Anthony Simons has played. But you have Yusuf Nurkic still, Josh Hart, still good options on both offense and defense. I just think the biggest concern for them was is Dame in it? Like, is Dame going to be good? Is Dame going to still be back with all the lack of winning that they've had in the playoffs? But Dame has played like Dame, and we shouldn't have doubted that. But they have a couple of guys that have really just stepped up. Like I said, Jeremy Grant and Anthony Simons have been playing really, really well. In San Antonio, barring the loss last night, I mean, I don't understand.
Your team,
I don't understand how they have 3 wins. I don't get it. I mean, our best player is Keldon Johnson.
Right.
Who? Like, he's not the number one on any other team. But he's playing really well. He's averaging over 20 points a game. Jeremy Sohan last night played incredibly well. For the first couple of games of the season, he didn't have like a total of 10 points, but he's playing incredibly well, this rookie. And I mean, it's just Pop. Pop is showing himself still as the top 2 best coaches of all time. And I still don't think they're going to make the playoffs. I would be shocked if they still have a winning record. But to go start 3-1 or 3-2 now after last night's loss to Minnesota. I mean, the other night they played Minnesota again. They held Anthony Edwards to 9 points. That's incredible.
Yes.
And they still have tied with the Nets' second most points per game given up in the league, and they're 3-2. That's the struggle for me, because they're equal with the Nets on giving up points. If they're 3-2 and they're 1-4. And they have KD and Kyrie. So there's something, obviously, that's why I think one of the biggest things is coaching, and the biggest thing is defense and cohesion on the team. There's nobody on the Spurs that can really have a big head about anything.
Right. You
can't. Ben Simmons has a big head for nothing, for no reason. Kyrie has a big head. KD has a big head. On the Spurs, there's just Keldon. And Keldon's just Keldon. And he's like, there's no reason for me to beg him. But I know I shouldn't be a number one option on any team, but here I am. And he's playing like it. He's playing really well. He's averaging over 20 points a game. And Jakob Poeltl is still incredible on defense and rebounding. So those are my teams: Portland, Utah, and San Antonio, but especially Utah. I think Utah is my breakout team because they had predicted 24.5 wins and they're 4-1. It's absolutely incredible. They have 1/6 of the wins that they're supposed to have the rest of the season. And they're playing like a playoff contender with no playoff talent. So that's my thing. They don't have Donovan Mitchell or Rudy Gobert, and they're still winning. It's incredible.
Exactly. Well, Micah, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on. Always great catching up, breaking these topics down. Thanks so much for being back on, man.
Awesome. I appreciate you having me. It was fun.
Definitely. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with our review of The Irishman. Welcome back to the show, and now we're getting into our review of The Irishman. I'm joined by 2 special guests. First, Max Petion, a good friend of the show who's been on the past. Thank you so much for being back on, Max.
Hey guys, thank you for having me again. I really enjoy.
Yeah, man, definitely. Guys, so
thanks.
And our second guest, Trenton Morales, has been on countless times in the past, and thank you so much for being back on, Trenton.
What's happening, y'all?
Yeah, man,
Cheers.
definitely. Cheers. Well, for the overview of The Irishman, it starts. The Irishman is a 2019 epic crime drama film directed and produced by Martin Scorsese and written by Steve Zalian, based on the 2004 nonfiction book I Heard You Paint Houses by Charles Brandt, starring Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci, Al Pacino, and Ray Romano. The film follows Frank Sharon, a truck driver who becomes a hitman involved with mobster Russell Buffalino and his crime family, including his time working for the powerful teamster Jimmy Hoffa. The film marks the ninth collaboration between directors Scorsese and De Niro, also the first collaboration between Scorsese and Pacino, in the fourth film in which both De Niro and Pacino appear in starring roles. It had a budget of 159 to 250 million and brought in 8 million into the box office. Received numerous accolades and also 10 nominations, including Best Director, and also nominated for 5 awards. But to you, Trent, to start this off, like, what were your initial thoughts on this film and how Scorsese kind of revisited familiar themes and had just a poignant feel to it, plus the profound effect it had?
First off, this movie is so long.
Very.
This movie is so long, bro. Man, yeah, I was, whenever this film came out, I had tons of friends who were like, "Man, you gotta watch it." I'm like, yeah, it sounds good. It's just that runtime. It's just like, man, this is gonna be a bear. I really, so I watched it for the first time this past week, and I literally had to watch like 3 different like sit downs. Like,
Set it up, yeah. Break it up.
It's just I broke it up in like 3 different watches, and but no, I mean, overall, I mean, it kind of checks all the boxes of like kind of that mobster 60s, 70s, 80s, like, feel, vibe, all that stuff, right? Whenever you see De Niro, Pesci, Pacino on the ticket, you know what you're getting from those guys, right? You know what you're getting from, of course, from Scorsese. Even and I obviously admit this, like I'm not as deep into Martin Scorsese as some other people are, like you, Wellington.
Right. Yeah.
I don't have like a ton of like catalogs or like movies that I have on my belt that he directed. But what I have seen, you kind of know what you're getting from them, right? And I mean, this is kind of like in his wheelhouse, right? Yeah, this is his wheelhouse, right? About organized crime and how it is affecting kind of the everyday person. Like I said, De Niro's De Niro, Pesci is Pesci. It's fun to kind of see him in a role that's not the burglar from Home Alone, right? He actually has some chops, right? He actually knows how to handle his character well. And then Pacino, I mean, yeah, he's just Al Pacino. He's always going to be loud. He's always going to be abrasive. But you know what? We love him for it because that's who he is, right? So yeah, it came away, just really. I think once you kind of get into the story and you kind of see it hit its stride, it's a fun film to watch. It checks all of the mobster, organized crime boxes, and it's a fun ride.
Yeah, definitely. To you, Max, in terms of your initial thoughts on this film and what were your takeaways of it, obviously the runtime of it was super long. What did you kind of think about this film and how it was put together with a really stacked cast?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it was crazy. Like the amount of like the people they had on there. Like I mean, Robert De Niro doesn't come cheap. You know, Joe Pesci, like you know, it's like this is the guy getting jacked up on Home Alone and whatnot. And so I guess for the amount of star power that was there, just like man, this is like a really I could tell it was an expensive film, but at the same time, I guess I was looking for more of that Al Capone type movie, and so it was I feel like it was a little more gutter. I don't know if that's the right way to say it. It was still like that mob life and whatnot, but it was like, at least from the movies that I've seen in the past, what's the one with
Is it Goodfellas?
Oh my gosh.
Oh, The Untouchables? Okay.
Yes. Like those guys seem to do things like very polished and whatnot, and like I don't know, some of the scenes in the movie where they were, it's like the stuff that they did was efficient, but it wasn't like how I would have imagined it gone.
The previous films.
It was less Hollywoodized, more like, and he's like regular dudes out here just capping people,
like breaking wrists on the sidewalk and all that stuff, man. Goodness,
man,
it was like, bro, like, but I know I mean, it was a lot, like like just the intricacy of what all the things they were connected to and the different character traits, like I don't know, it was definitely like a lot to process. It's like the movie like Tenet,
mind bending.
Like there's so many deep parts, but I feel like that movie was too fast. I needed a little bit more detail because I was still lost to this day. Whereas
me and Trenton as Nolan fans, we're big into that film.
Yeah, but like this one was like but when I think about it, like if you had a grandparent tell you a story, like sometimes they can be long. It's the older guy telling the story, so he's just recalling. It's more like a life flashing before your eyes in slow motion. But yeah, I mean, I think it was pretty cool, like to see the different characters interact, and I don't think I really paid attention to how many movies De Niro and
Scorsese.
What's the guy?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah,
it's a lot. That's what I wanted to get to. That was the next thing I wanted to get to, Trent, because like when you see a duo like that collaborate so many times, because I was watching one of the interviews that they did, Table for Four, of The Irishman with all those four actors with Pacino, Pesci, and De Niro, and even Scorsese. Like they were talking about how Scorsese and De Niro, they grew up in the same neighborhood, knew each other from childhood, but kind of just they hadn't seen each other for years, and then they started to collaborate. Like, what are your thoughts on like when a duo like that collaborates for so many movies and kind of just even years later still find ways to put something out?
Yeah, it's. I mean, what it does it speaks to kind of like that. Like people have that niche, right, and they kind of have that collaboration, that ability to kind of work together. I mean, you could point to DiCaprio. It's the same way with Scorsese, right? I mean, he's been in so many Scorsese films. What he had been about like three or at least four, right?
Right.
Because Gangs of New York, you had The Departed,
Wolf of Wall Street.
Wolf of Wall Street, and then Shutter Island, right?
Yeah.
So that's like four films right there that he's already done with him. And Leo's still got a good, probably hopefully a good 30, 40 years. With him. Now, of course, Scorsese doesn't have that because he's definitely an older guy. But maybe you have at least two or three other films with Scorsese and DiCaprio. But as far as the De Niro factor, like it's what it does is I think the best of the best find ways to bring people in who consistently push forward the vision of what they have, right? Yeah. I mean, we see Nolan do this with Cillian Murphy, Tom Hardy, Michael Caine. Those are kind of the guys that are consistently in every film Christopher Nolan does. Even if it's like a brief, like like Tenet, you talk about Max brought up Tenet. Michael Caine has a very small role in there, but he's in there, right? Because there's a collaboration factor there. So, yeah, I think that's what kind of keeps that intrigue there. Is like again, you kind of know what you're getting into with these guys. You got to know what to expect. And obviously, I admit this. Like I've not seen Goodfellas yet. I haven't seen Taxi Driver, and I haven't seen like Casino. But just reading off of kind of reading kind of the bio for them and seeing the cast, like I know what to expect from these movies. So. Yeah, I mean, I get it because that's who Scorsese is.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And getting to our first topic from 1 to 4 stars, what would you give it? I would go with 3 because this was an overall, riveting film, and it's still a modern day, a mobster type movie that contains fluid cinematography and grizzled gang violence. I do still hold that notion of like I'm Goodfellas, Casino, watched countless times. To me, it still doesn't stack up to those movies in terms of some of the fluidity of certain parts of the scenes. But to you, Max, like from your perspective, like what would be your particular rating, like from 1 to 4 stars for this film?
I'm gonna give it 4
Whoa!
stars.
Oh my goodness! Sound the alarm! Sound the alarm!
Somebody call save on.
Sound the alarm! Sound the speed dial.
I mean, Well, I'm gonna say that because of like it like at some point you forget like these are like old men too, like
That is fair.
in real life
That's
and
true.
in the story.
Yeah, that's a valid point.
But you know like you've seen people do movies and it's almost like like they are like on auto zone, like you know like they're automatic, like they've done the same movie, work with the same director, like but you know just the way they told the story and you know the different things that are just being like I'm thinking about one of the actors who talks about uh, no matter what the movie is, he wants to come in, he wants to know like what was this character's life like, you know, or how did they grow up, and like sometimes you know the movie might be a small thing or they don't even think about those kind of things, but like you can tell in a movie like this, like you can see like you know how Frank has to kind of go in between people and know when to say something, know like the internal struggles, like you can see like this is like a real struggle, and you forget like you're watching De Niro and Pacino, like all these guys who have done different movies that we know them from, and it's like they pulled away from those still, and we're able to put this together. You know, like I didn't realize even Joe Pesci and De Niro are I think the same age, or I think Pesci might be a year older. And I'm just like I didn't realize, you know. But I think I think they did a pretty good job in the way they the acting and you know how deep the characters went. I thought it was pretty good.
The narration
and
part,
like De Niro's narration was, it was like you almost felt like you were a part of it. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm about to cap somebody.
Might get me going, man.
Might get me going.
Like,
Definitely. Yeah.
No, yeah, Max. I think I'm right now. I have 3 on kind of what I have, and honestly that's attributed to kind of the length of the film. But here's the deal. I mean, like, my goodness, The Godfather, all of them are just as long, right? Yeah. I mean, Godfather 1 is not as long as The Irishman, but I mean, there's some moments where it's like, so I can't necessarily blame it on like, on like it's like too slow. I don't think it's a slow film. I think it's just so long, and it feels like one of those things that maybe you cut some things here or there. You don't go as deep into a character as you want, but I mean, but to Max's point, like, do you lose that feeling, right? Like, okay, if we're going to understand like some of the depth of some of these characters, then we have to go down that road that we're going down, right? And I think that's what kind of makes the film compelling, right? Because I mean, again, we're stepping into kind of the historical piece, right? So we have to understand, like why was Jimmy Hoffa so like bitter against like the Kennedys? Why was this happening? Why was this? I mean, and you begin to understand the intricacies of these things, and it helps like bring to life this story, right? It's like now I want to call my dad who grew up in this time period and be like, hey, pops, like, what do you know about Jimmy Hoffa? What do you know about this? What do you know about that? Right? I mean, but also it kind of speaks to that time period, right? That it's just so filled with conspiracy and just kind of like dark shadows that people don't really know until you actually see it, from a a book's perspective. So for me, I roll 3, and honestly, it's going towards like, I think to me, just right now, I think in my own personal opinion, the time is kind of what drags it down a little bit, but it's not. The performances I think are great. I think at this point, I'm convinced that some in his like past life, De Niro was a gangster. And he was probably capping some folks out there as well. So
it's too natural. It's too natural for him. It's way too natural for him.
Yeah. And I think like sometimes you see the stars' names and like I hate when people throw Oscar noms at movies just because they were olden times, and a lot of the people who vote, like, I felt like they earned their nods.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like the way the film put together, like they didn't just mail it in. They like they acted like
for sure.
like this is like a master class. Like if they were doing like like we've seen these type of movies, but they're like, okay, we're gonna make you feel or think about it in a different way.
Definitely. And now getting into favorite character, I personally would go with Frank Sheeran because there were so many subtleties in his performance, and him being a psychopathic hitman went along well with him struggling to feel anything as he kind of went along following the orders he was given, and then went through that like remorse later in the film. To you, Max, like who would be your particular favorite character in this movie?
I would say Russell was one of them because I almost felt like Russell was the teacher who learned along the way how to do things that he does, and I think Frank kind of was the disciple in a sense, and but Russell wasn't really. It's like Russell understood the game. He wasn't quote unquote in charge, but he was in charge. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like how he knew what to say, when to say it. Like even that scene where dude pulls up on him like, young cat don't care about nothing, and then Frank sits down. He just looks at him. I was like, oh man, somebody.
Oh yeah, that go ahead.
How they kept telling you. They kept telling you it was about to happen. I was like, I like that they didn't tell us there, but we all knew like, oh snap. Well, thanks for coming. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like it's just crazy that, they never see that coming. But I just thought like, the way he went about things, even like, talking about the trip they're taking, old guys and the way he just carried himself. He tells people when, what to do and but he also stayed within the power boundaries that he was given, even though he knows he had a lot more power than that. So I like his character.
To you, Trent, who would kind of be your overall favorite character in this movie?
Man, I was super intrigued with Peggy all throughout this movie. She, it's this character who is witnessing her father do all these things, right? It's like every time he goes to leave in the middle of the night, she's there. Every time there's a brutal moment where he kind of teaches somebody a lesson, she's there. But it's funny how she's also one of the closest people to like Jimmy Hoffa, right? So I think she almost like looked to Jimmy as someone who was more of a father figure to her than her own dad was, right? So it's like I think her innocence is just robbed from her again and again and again, just by virtue of her father's actions being kind of done to her, right, or done around her, right? And of course we always hear the gangster excuse, right? The Walter White excuse of everything I do for this family, but it's like no, you're actually ruining your family by doing this, right? He divorces his wife, takes the kids, and then he gets married, and on and on and on, right? But it's almost funny how, like, again, like her, like, I almost wonder, like, on a rewatch, would it come across more of like she draws like intimacy and fatherly affection from Jimmy to scorn her father, right? To make him feel the guilt of like the way that he was just absent from her life. It's one of those instances, and it happens, very frequently, right? Where a dad can be quote unquote present, but be absent at the same time. Absent emotionally, all that kind of stuff. So seeing her character kind of develop all throughout the movie, and then Anna Paquin, I think is how you say her last name. She always kind of holds it down whatever film she jumps into, and just so just seeing that kind of play out, and just like the regret that that he is left with, Frank is left with at the end of this film, just speaks to the way that he just missed the mark, right? And the scene when he goes to the bank and she just like puts
clothes,
like his clothes and walks away. I mean, just heart wrenching, right? And so I mean, she was kind of that emotional tug that kind of kept the film grounded at times, right? Is that anytime, like, again, you would see him like going up in the middle of the night. It's like, Daddy, where you going? I'm going to work. and now she knows her father's going to do some pretty terrible things, and it's sad to see.
Yeah, definitely. And now moving on to most memorable scenes, I had Frank avenges Peggy. Also, always charge a gun with a knife. You run. The killing of Crazy Joe Gallo. Jimmy's final moments. Frank's phone call, and then finally the final shot. To you, Max, were there any like scenes in here that you kind of went back at to look at it as like the most memorable ones overall in this movie?
Definitely the one where what's the dude's name? My goodness, the young guy, Cat. When they, when he tries Russell and tells him to chill, and like that was like, I felt like that was coming, like it was teed up to happen that way, but the way they did it was like, like, hey, like I'm not the boss, but I'm a boss, like. Like, and it goes back to that scene where him and Frank are talking, and he's like, "Yeah, Jimmy's, higher up." He's like, "No, not like that." You know what I'm saying?
There's
like,
levels.
There's levels to this, and the young cat didn't respect that, and so that way that whole scene unfolded, like, Frank was talking about him saying he does whatever, he doesn't care about anything, but then in that case, it actually backfired on him. Because you can do that to other people who aren't as important, but then you do that to an important person, hey man. But then the watermelon scene was pretty hilarious.
You guys were feeling like watermelon.
I'm like, I ain't think about that, but that's kind of innovative in a sense. And it's like, you know your people,
Definitely.
It's like you can't do that with you can't do that if someone wants you to smoke, but alcohol is like it just gets absorbed in so many things. Like I was like, you could have killed the watermelon. I'm just like,
you want some?
Wasn't something I would think like would be in a scene like that, in a place like that. It was just like, because it's always associated with like black people and people of color, whatever, and watermelon. But I'm just like, it was just like a funny, like the whole thing.
Hilarious. Yeah.
It's kind of a point of that like Scorsese irreverent humor, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's like ways that he just like throws in those little tidbits of like, oh, that's really irreverent and so kind of off the wall, but it works, right? It works for that moment.
Yeah, but it almost gave me a little bit of anxiety though. I felt like I was waiting for the moment where like Jimmy was like, smells the alcohol or something, but maybe not being someone who drinks, like he doesn't really have a connection or idea of like what they were doing. So
you, Trenton, like were there any like overall memorable scenes in this one that you kind of feel like were the main standouts?
Yeah, I mean, I think you stole my three. Wellington. So like the moment when Frank avenges Peggy is like really powerful. It just like pulls a grocery guy out of there. It's something that it's always funny. It's like like you see this man get beat up in broad daylight where his hand gets like broken and all that kind of stuff, wrist gets broken, and people are just like, oh, it's just another Monday, right? It's just keep it moving on.
Typical.
Someone said I heard this week is DFMK. You can put those together. It's like, hey, when you become a dad,
true. I mean, listen, Max. I mean, there are legitimate moments like where if I feel like my son is being threatened or his like safety is, and I also feel with my wife too. It's like something just like rises up, and I'm like, yo, I gotta check myself because I don't want to do nothing foolish right now, right? Or say nothing foolish,
right? It's like y'all act right because I ain't trying to be on.
That's right. News. That's right, man. But yeah, I mean, that was a really powerful moment. Again, I think kind of leads to the development of Frank's character and also Peggy's as well. That whole sequence of the movie where they are luring Jimmy in and trying to and ready to take him out, and just like kind of the moment of like, oh, Frank is the one that ends up pulling this trigger, right? It wasn't somebody else. Right. So just really kind of settles in a way of like, oh, that's just dirty, man. And in that final scene, just like And maybe we can riff on this a little bit later, but just like the way that he just looks at the priest and says, "Hey, Father, would you just leave the door open for me?" And just the camera, pans back, and it's just, all you see is Frank sitting right there in the crack of the door, and screen fades to black, credits roll. Right? It's like almost like, man, that's a fascinating, fascinating scene. I'll throw one more in there. Right? When it's revealed who Frank is talking to the entire movie. Oh, it's like he's talking to two FBI dudes, right?
Yeah.
And just like, they're sitting in the little courtyard area, and man, them OG gangsters is like, I ain't got nothing to say.
Never gonna give it up. Never gonna give it up.
Never gonna give it up. Ever. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it kind of connects to when Jimmy left the door open when Frank was in his suite. Like not one to be boxed in a sense.
That's good.
But if you think about it, the life that Frank lived, it was like that same feeling, but because of everything that he did, it was like instead of Jim, Scorsese, and Frank died, in the nursing home. Like he was already dead because he boxed himself in. He was alone, like nothing to show for it, and just the stories, and like even talking to the FBI, I was like, it's not like a snitching and like in a sense like I just need to tell so I'll get in trouble kind of thing, but it's like been holding on to these stories and it's like just want to hear them or talk to somebody about it almost in a sense. It's like some weird kind of therapy he's going through,
Yeah.
It's kind of wild.
And now getting into most memorable quotes, I heard you paint houses. Also, whatever anybody says, they're a little concerned. They're very concerned. You never know by looking at this guy, but all roads led back to Russ. You charge a guy, always charge with a gun. With a knife, you run away from a knife. So you charge with a gun. With a knife, you run. Also, you don't know how fast time goes by until you get there. And finally, you might be demonstrating a failure to show appreciation. To you, Trenton, were there any quotes in here that you kind of felt as though were some of the ones that resonated the most throughout this movie?
Yeah, I think I had three that kind of stood out. So the first one was like Jimmy Hoffa. If I said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. I don't care if they're Irish. I don't care if they're Catholic. There's one person you can't trust in this life. It's millionaires' kids. Like straight up. So this is the conversation between Whispers and Frank. It's like, to tell you the truth, I'm a little concerned. It's like narrator. Whenever anybody says they're a little concerned, they're very concerned. Yeah. Whispers. As a matter of fact, I'm really more than a little concerned. Narrating, and when they say they're a little more than a little concerned, they're desperate. And again, that kind of actually speaks to what Max was talking about earlier, right? Like that whole scene where Whispers tries to get Frank to take out this whole laundry facility, then plays into Russell saving Frank's life from getting killed, right? Because we had that moment where he goes back to the restaurant, sits down at the table, and it's like, oh, like you're basically about to rob me of the interest that I have in this company, right? And Russell saves Frank's life in that moment. And then the final one I have, Frank sharing, 3 people can keep a secret, only if 2 of them are dead.
Yeah, I mean those were some. Every quote in here, I feel as though, like you said, with the narration part of it, it was translating what was the message that was made throughout the film. Like another thing for that I wanted to get to, Trenton, like to you, like, do you feel as though the regret part, like at the end of this movie, like always showing like the remorse, we see it in all mob movies, but especially in this one, do you think that last 30 minutes was like really necessary to kind of tie the bow together? Because if we don't get those last 30 minutes, we don't really see the regret that Frank was feeling like throughout the movie and all the things that he had to do that he eventually just felt remorseful about.
It would feel that way, Wellington, if we didn't have those snippets all throughout the movie itself. This movie kind of bounces from timeline, from like past to more present to like future, and bouncing back and forth, right? And because obviously you see it in the way that the characters age and de-age back and forth, right? So, yeah, I think if we don't have that in all scattered throughout the film, and the way that he's talking and narrating all that kind of stuff. I think we definitely would have missed that point of desperation, and it would, and probably those last 30 minutes feel a little more forced than they could have. So I do think it's necessary because I mean at the end of the day, I mean yes, I mean do we want the bad guys to get away? Do we want them to succeed? I think there's obviously times we want to feel that, right? But at the end of the day, too, we also want justice. We want the right thing to be done.
Always,
Even if it's not if it's not accomplished, because obviously that did not happen in this film. But also, I want you to feel bad for the dirt you did, right? Like, I want you to feel the remorse of like, you lost your family, bro. Like you threw it all away. You had it all, and you threw it all away. And I want you to feel the sorrow of that.
Definitely. To you, Max, like what were your memorable quotes in this movie that you kind of felt as though were the top ones or the ones that you kind of kept going back to?
I think one is you don't know how fast time goes until you get there. That's one. That's one of them. And where's the other one? The one about they send the divers down in the river. A small country. I was like, at some point, I'm going to have to build up or something. Like somebody, like that was just crazy. That was just crazy. 3 people can keep a secret only when 2 of them are dead. Like some of them statements were just like they were like a foreshadow. It's like if you get to that part, you should probably like do some introspection of it. Introspect.
I got you, man. We got you, man. We got you,
inner thinking of what you're trying to what you're doing and how that relates. Look at Frank. Where he ends up. It's all alone and like. And I think it's like, too, like just the fact that he was a soldier and, whatever PTSD you get from that, and then you're almost always at war doing what you're doing. And so there's only so much humanity you can have being a house painter.
And now getting into what did you like the most about the storyline. To me, just how it explored, universal themes of grief, regret, growing old in memory. I thought was really potent, and it is a slower and sadder take on a crime film, but still makes for an absorbing watch. To you, Max, like what particular element of this storyline did you kind of like the most?
I think I was just thinking like, something that makes these, it seems like a lot of these, gangster movies and whatever generation, genre, it's always that loyal guy who, just makes everything work. Like you can't have or grow these, crime families or whatever without that one stable, loyal person who's be down for whatever. I think like Russell was that, and Frank at the same time. Like they both had that kind of like, it wasn't like they were like foot mats, but they understood they understood the game, and that loyalty helped out a lot. So you don't really spend so much time talking about the big boss because Russell handles things. I think it's a certain amount of like it felt like a certain amount of if Russell makes himself useful, knows how to handle things, keeps the heat off the boss, and brings prosperity to the boss and whatnot. Like that's that makes that machine work. And so that whole theme about the loyalty, but it also like has its like flaws too, and I think that played out as well. I think of the quote that talks about like power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so you can see that with Jimmy, Jimmy was more loyal to his cause and himself. Whereas everybody's looking out for themselves, but some people know when to look out for the bigger picture,
right?
And so Russell did that really well, like in a sense. And he wasn't flashy about it, mm-hmm. And then I think that's a lot of stuff that Frank learned too. Like you want to grow and you want to move. Like this guy, even like from the beginning, he knew like something was up. Like Russ seemed to be real important, and when you see that, you're like, I want to do something like that. And so I think that big part of that was the loyalty aspect.
Yeah, to you, Trent. Yeah, go ahead.
And Scorsese and De Niro.
Oh yeah,
those guys working together. That also kind of ties in.
Absolutely. To you, Trent, like what particular element of this storyline did you kind of like the most overall?
As somebody who really enjoys kind of the history of our country and all kinds of, and kind of like hearing and learning more about it, like to just kind of see that era in a different way, like like you had this like working man and Frank who's trying to kind of I think he starts off with a true pursuit, just trying to provide more for his family, put more bread on the table, right? And just kind of like the demands that it takes upon him to like, okay, if you want to get more, you got to give more, right? And you're gonna continue to give and give and give until ultimately you're so deep in you can't get out, right? And I think we kind of see it today, and not that we have like mobs running around or anything like that, but like we just have people kind of
do we not?
That man got all the way up in the camera.
All the way up. Zoom in.
Just saying.
But just like just kind of seeing again another kind of piece of that organized crime, right? Mm-hmm. And how like they had their fingers in everything, right? Oh, something comes up, we got this guy to handle it. Something comes up, we got this guy to handle it, right? Oh, you need to get off, we got the lawyer for that. You need to sway the votes and something, we got like that scene where like that one guy keeps getting back in line and voting. it went to the
multiple times, yeah.
Like, took down the names of all those people, and it's like boom, boom, boom. All right, the people in office are now voted into office, right? So just seeing kind of those things kind of brought to light, but just showing how many I think people you push men to the brink of desperation. Sometimes they'll do whatever it takes to kind of get what they want.
Right. Definitely. And getting to 10 years from now, do you still think it'll be watchable and intriguing? This is one of the toughest watchable and intriguing questions I think we've had in a while, because you look at a film like this, it's super long, super weighty, but it's also dropped in an era where we aren't seeing as many long films. Like to you, Trenton, do you think 10 years from now this will still be a watchable and intriguing movie?
I think the runtime may scare some people away. I think it'd be interesting to see, like, would this be better absorbed if it was like a 3-part miniseries, right? I mean, truly, like if they went back and like re-edited the film and cut up into 3 parts, and people would be like,
"Oh yeah,
I want to watch this. Yeah, I'll watch this." But I mean, if he's like, "Oh, you're going to commit 3 hours," and again, I think what people need to understand is that you don't have to watch this film. This is kind of one of those, like, literally, like I was able to kind of like, all right, let me get to this scene, break, cut right there.
Intermission.
The film actually does a pretty good job of kind of like, you're able to find those areas where I say, okay, I can pause here and I can pick up whenever I'm ready, right? So I think the runtime may scare some folks, and I think truly Wellington. I think that this genre of movie doesn't attract it obviously it attracts a decent enough audience for these movies to keep getting made, right? Because people will eat this stuff up. I mean, goodness, I went back and started rewatching The Godfather yesterday, and this movie is almost, it is 50 years old, and it's just as good today as it was when it first came out, right? Yeah. And people still revisit this stuff over and over again. So as how this question goes, how I kind of feel about most films when it comes to this question, it's always going to have that group of people who go to it because that's their niche and they love this stuff. But I think the average consumer will probably be like, nah, I'm good. Pass.
Yeah.
You know, I'll go read the review on IMDb and keep it moving.
Yeah, it definitely does feel that way. Like to you, Max, 10 years from now, do you still think this will be a watchable, intriguing movie?
I kind of agree with Trenton. It's like I think this is the trade off from being on a network, like a cable network versus Netflix, because you can be scrolling through like HBO and then it catches your eye next to your 3 hour movie, you didn't know it because you didn't know how long it was, but on Netflix it puts it right there and you're like, yeah, I got some things to do today. And, I'm the type of person, I like to finish the movie in one setting.
Yeah.
Like, I hate to break up movies.
You may never get back to it.
I'm like, especially if what you watch was good, it's like, oh man, I don't want it to end. So I'm just going to
save it for a little bit.
Take a minute to go back to it. But I mean, I think some of the like social things that are happening that are represented in the movie, like, think about how they talk about gangs and stuff now in urban neighborhoods. It's like they were doing this before these neighborhoods were constructed. So I feel like maybe some of the social elements that the movie has may be kind of like may throw some people off. Like, oh, we don't watch another mob movie. But I still think like the star power and the acting, might still pull people into it. Just to maybe if you want to learn, you maybe not you didn't like that environment, Teamsters and all these things and the way they did unions but maybe that's a better always Hollywood a better history lesson to a better way to digest history than through like a movie like that to give you some of the truth of those things. So I think it's about and I can see how it could may not be because
it's
like
preference as well. Because just like you said, Trent, some people are going to be like, why would I watch this when I could watch The Godfather, or I could watch there are so many other mob movies that are more revered. This one, it's like you said, it's on Netflix, but some are going to feel like it's just too long winded. But I want to do one bonus question with like kind of like other favorite Martin Scorsese movies. To you, for me personally, I go Goodfellas, Taxi Driver, and then The Departed. The Departed is another one, a little more recent. I mean, '06 compared to the first two films I mentioned. Great cast as well. To you, Trent, are there any other Scorsese films that you kind of have as like some of your favorites?
So as I mentioned earlier, I don't have a deep catalog as far as Scorsese films that I've watched, but I have enough to do the top three that I have so far. So for me, I'm going to The Departed. Man, that cast is just so good. Leo, Wahlberg. I mean, just
It's a dream cast.
Yeah, Damon. Keep rolling them out there, right? I'm going to go. Next one is Silence. I don't think a lot of people talk about Silence. It's a kind of a low key Scorsese film, and it's interesting too because I think he kind of opens himself up to his Catholic roots and his upbringing, and again another one of those amazing cast: Andrew Garfield, Adam Driver. I mean, just really good. Definitely a slow burn for sure. Like it is a long, slow film, which I think it's kind of I feel like we're saying this over and over again. It's like a Scorsese thing, right?
It is.
He makes these long films. But yeah,
Me
I
and
love
Savon
Silence.
say it all the time. It feels like you're doing overtime when you're watching these Scorsese films, man.
That's it.
Like
That's it. Yeah, that's right. And then I'll roll. So for me, I have two left. I have The Irishman and Gangs of New York. And I just thought between the two, I think The Irishman comes off a little better. And again, I think Gangs of New York is a solid film. It's but I felt myself kind of getting more bored with Gangs of New York. Even though I think the cast is great. You got Leo. You got who's the guy who's the method actor? I'm trying to think about his name right now. Oh goodness, he played Lincoln years ago.
Daniel Day-Lewis.
Yeah, Daniel Day-Lewis.
Yeah.
I mean, good, great cast of people,
that's
right?
amazing.
But yeah, I just think that The Irishman stood out a little bit better to me, and I think the cast is just a little bit stronger. The story's a little bit more intriguing, and I think the pace is just a little bit better. Even though it's obviously a longer film, The Irishman is. I think the pace is a little bit better for this film compared to Gangs of New York.
Yeah, and for you, Max, to close it out, are there any other Scorsese films you would kind of have listed as some of your other favorites?
Shark Tales.
This man.
Oh my goodness.
I'm wilding. You know what I realized though? Like, I've seen parts of many of his movies, but I think so. I'm trying to remember them. I think if I watch them again, I'd be like, I've seen all of these. I mean, I've seen the whole of this or that, but you know, I mean, you got Goodfellas. Obviously, Irishman. You already said that, but some of the ones that Trenton
bits and pieces,
like those. Yeah, and so like for me, it's kind of hard to kind of be like, boom, this one. Because sometimes
his films are always on TV. They're always on TV.
I'll scroll,
yeah, you see little parts of it.
Yeah. I'll scroll and catch it and be like, or like Taxi, and I'm thinking, whoa, I'm not sure what happened to my life.
Oh no!
Hold up! Oh man!
Oh.
It's on a timer, so I think it just hit my. Hold on, let me bring my light back on.
Well, Trenton, now I'll give you one more question, Trenton. Okay. In terms of Scorsese going forward, do you feel as though he's got maybe like one more film in him, or because I heard he's creating another film with DiCaprio? Do you feel as though it's one of those things where he kind of knows that, okay, obviously he's getting near the end of his career, but do you think he may have one more like masterpiece in him, or is it one of those things where he's gonna like pace himself to see like how his career plays out?
Yeah, I think he does. I think, is he going to have kind of like one last hurrah, right?
Yeah,
like exactly. I said, I mean, because he's not a young man by any means. He's got, and I think he has to make this one count. If you're going to go out with a bang. And but it's interesting if you go look at his IMDb credits right now. Apparently, he's got tons of film, tons of things lined up right now as far as producing and directing. Which I mean, again, I think if you're just kind of sitting in the boardroom saying yes, this sounds good. I mean, you can obviously stack those credits up, right? But yeah, it'd be interesting to see is he got one more in the chamber that he's going to give to the whole world, and then just let it ride and let it become a masterpiece in of itself. So it'd be interesting to see if he can get that one last big cinematic claim, and then we get left with that.
Definitely. Well, Trenton and Max, it's been an absolute pleasure having you guys on, and thanks so much for doing this.
Absolutely, man. Anytime.
Yeah. Well, that wraps it up for tonight. Yeah, man, definitely. Well, that wraps it up for tonight. I'm host Winter Burns. This has been Full Scope. See you later.